In June of 2010, they set out on a trip they had dreamed about for years, the Amazon rainforest. On the morning of June 14, before they stepped onto the trail, they stopped at the entrance sign. It was old wood, worn by years of sun and rain. They smiled for a photo, their backpacks already strapped on. Emma uploaded it to Instagram with a short caption, "Into the jungle we go. Wish us luck." Their friends saw two happy faces about to begin another exciting trip. Nobody imagined that this would be their final post. 2 days later, silence. They had promised to message Emma's sister when they returned to their lodge. That message never came. Calls went unanswered. At first, the family thought it was poor reception, common in the rainforest. But as hours turned into night, worry began to feel like fear. Something wasn't right. Soon the search began. Rangers checked the trails. Villagers joined in, guiding rescuers through hidden paths. Helicopters flew low over the endless green, while search dogs worked the muddy ground. Everyone expected to find a sign, footprints, a dropped item, anything. But there was nothing. Emma and Daniel had simply vanished. For 12 years, the case remained unsolved. The family held on to hope, year after year. Friends remembered that last smiling photo. Theories spread, from jaguar attacks to getting lost, even whispers of darker explanations. But no proof ever came. Then, in the summer of 2022, everything changed. Deep inside the forest, a team of geologists stumbled upon a cave sealed by rock and hidden for more than a decade. What they discovered inside would finally reveal the truth about Emma and Daniel Parker. And that truth was far darker than anyone had imagined. Friends used to call them the prepared couple. If a trip required one map, Daniel carried 3. If a hike needed 1 flashlight, Emma packed 2 extra batteries. They weren't trying to show off. They just believed preparation was part of the adventure. They first met 7 years before their disappearance. The story, as their friends told it, was simple. Emma had signed up for a wilderness first aid course. Daniel was there too, attending for his job. They were paired together during an exercise that simulated an injured hiker. Emma handled the patient with calm skill, while Daniel organized their supplies and suggested backup plans. By the end of that class, they realized they worked well as a team. Their connection grew quickly after that. Not long after, they began hiking together on weekends. Small trips at first, local trails, state parks, nothing too risky. With time, their journeys stretched farther. Mountains in Colorado, deserts in Arizona, even a few international trips. Each one tested them in small ways, but it also proved how naturally they fit together. Emma provided steady judgment, Daniel handled logistics, and together they rarely felt unprepared. Travel became their shared language. Instead of fancy restaurants or crowded beaches, they collected experiences in the wild. Their home back in Oregon was filled with maps on the walls, carefully labeled gear stored in bins, and photo albums from past adventures. Every detail reflected who they were, a couple that valued exploration, but never forgot caution. Their friends admired that balance. Some called it obsessive, but others found it reassuring. When you traveled with Emma and Daniel, you felt safe. They had thought of everything before you even stepped onto the trail. Extra food? Packed. First aid? Ready. Emergency contacts? Written down twice. It was part of why no one worried when they announced their Amazon trip. Everyone assumed they would come back with stories, just like always. And yet, despite all the planning, despite their reputation for safety, Emma and Daniel would become part of one of the rainforest's deepest mysteries. Their friends often said they were the last couple anyone expected to vanish. Maybe that's why their story still pulls people in. It didn't happen to careless adventurers. It happened to 2 people who did everything right. Planning the Amazon trip had been on Emma and Daniel's calendar for months. They didn't just wake up one day and decide to go. Every step was researched, every detail written down. Daniel had spent weeks reading weather reports, studying maps of the region, and checking trail conditions. Emma handled the medical side, making sure their first aid kits were fully stocked and updated. Between the 2 of them, no stone was left unturned. Their living room turned into a staging area. Backpacks lay open on the floor, gear lined up in neat rows. Daniel kept a checklist he updated every night. Extra batteries for the GPS, water purification tablets, lightweight tents, and emergency blankets. Emma went through each item twice, sometimes 3 times. She even wrote expiration dates on bandages and antibiotics, just to be certain they were safe to use. To their families, this routine wasn't surprising. It was who they were. Emma's sister once joked, "If the world ever ends, I want to be in your basement." Daniel laughed at the time, but it wasn't far from the truth. He always believed preparation wasn't optional, it was survival. When they told their families about the Amazon trip, no one panicked. Daniel explained the plan in detail. They would fly to Brazil, connect with a guide who would drop them near the trail, and spend a few days exploring before returning to a lodge. Emma reassured her sister that they had emergency beacons and enough supplies to last twice as long as planned. To everyone else, it sounded safe, even smart. The night before they left, Emma called her parents. She promised to check in every couple of days and to text as soon as they got back to the lodge. Daniel had already sent his itinerary to a close friend, including flight numbers, trail routes, and emergency contacts. He even left copies of their IDs and insurance information behind, tucked neatly into an envelope, just in case. It was their ritual. Never start an adventure without a backup plan. Packing wasn't just about items, it was about mindset. Emma rolled her clothes carefully, separating clean sets in waterproof bags. Daniel tested their satellite phone twice, making sure it powered on. They both rechecked their passports, their permits, and their travel insurance. Each step gave them confidence. They were ready. On the morning of June 13th, their bags sat by the door, zipped and sealed. Emma glanced around their home one last time. Plants watered, windows locked, nothing left undone. Daniel loaded the luggage into their car with the precision of a man who treated packing like science. By the time they reached the airport, their nerves had melted into excitement. The Amazon wasn't just another trip. It was the dream they had been waiting for. Friends messaged them before takeoff. "Send us jungle pics. Don't get lost." Emma replied with a laughing emoji. Daniel, as usual, responded with details. "Don't worry, we've got 3 different maps." To those who knew them, it was just another example of how predictable they were. Emma brought the warmth. Daniel brought the logic. Together, they made people believe nothing could touch them. But the truth was, no amount of planning could prepare them for what the rainforest was about to bring. The morning of June 14th began like so many of their trips before. Emma woke early, slipping quietly out of bed to check the final packing list. The air was heavy with humidity, a reminder that the rainforest was never far away. Daniel was already awake, sipping instant coffee from a tin mug, going over the trail permit for the 5th time. Both of them were calm, almost routine in their movements. They had done this so many times before. Wake up, check supplies, begin the journey. But this time felt different. This was the Amazon. They shared a quick breakfast of fruit and bread, laughing softly about how bland it was compared to the meals they had left behind in Oregon. Emma joked that the real adventure would be finding good coffee once they were back. Daniel teased her, saying she'd thank him for packing extra energy bars when the trail got tough. It was light, normal conversation, the kind you have when you don't know you're living a moment that will later be remembered in pieces. By 8 a.m., they were standing at the entrance of the trail. The wooden sign above them was old, carved letters faded from years of storms and sun. They both paused to take it in. Behind that sign stretched miles of dense jungle, green walls of leaves, thick vines, and a trail that snaked into the unknown. Daniel set up the camera, adjusted the angle, and wrapped his arm around Emma. She leaned in close. Their smiles were wide, real, untouched by fear. Emma uploaded the photo to Instagram before they took the first step. "Into the jungle we go. Wish us luck." The caption was short, but it carried their excitement. Within minutes, comments began to appear. Friends encouraged them, joked with them, and waited for updates that would never come. That post became the line between what was known and what would soon be lost. The first part of the trail was gentle, winding through patches of sunlight that slipped between the leaves. Birds called overhead. Insects hummed in waves. Emma pointed out the vibrant flowers along the path, crouching to take pictures of bright orchids hidden between roots. Daniel marked their progress on the GPS, making sure every step was logged. To them, it was exactly how a journey should begin, steady, beautiful, and full of possibility. Around mid-morning, they stopped at a small clearing. Daniel pulled out the map, checked the route, and compared it with the coordinates on his device. Emma sat on a fallen log, sipping water, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. They weren't rushing. They had 3 days planned, plenty of time to enjoy the forest. A couple nearby later told investigators they saw Emma and Daniel pass by around this time. They remembered the matching backpacks, the neat, organized way they carried themselves. Nothing about them seemed careless. By late morning, they had crossed into thicker forest. The sunlight faded, swallowed by the canopy above. The trail narrowed, twisting past large roots and slippery ground. This was the Amazon in its truest form, humid, wild, unpredictable. Still, they moved with steady confidence. Daniel took the lead, checking the path, while Emma followed, occasionally stopping to take a photo. Their last confirmed movements came just before noon. Daniel sent a quick message from their satellite phone to Emma's sister. All good, making good time. It was short, efficient, like most of Daniel's updates. The signal barely reached out from the edge of the canopy, but the message went through. That was the last anyone would ever hear from them. After that, silence. No more messages. No more photos. The jungle closed in, and the trail of Emma and Daniel Parker disappeared. For their families, the picture posted that morning became more than just a memory. It was proof of life, proof of happiness, and unknowingly, proof of the last moment before everything changed. When Emma and Daniel set out on their trip, they promised to keep in touch. It was their ritual. Every journey ended with the same message to Emma's sister, Anna. "We're safe, back at the lodge." It was simple, reassuring, and always on time. On the evening of June 16th, Anna sat in her kitchen, her phone placed on the counter where she could see it. Dinner simmered on the stove. Her children played in the next room. She checked the screen every few minutes, waiting for the familiar notification. But the message never came. At first, she tried to brush off the worry. Reception in the Amazon was unpredictable. Maybe they were running late. Maybe the satellite phone was low on battery. There had to be a reason. But as hours passed, the silence became harder to ignore. By 8 p.m., she was calling Emma's phone, straight to voicemail. She tried Daniel's. The same. She told herself not to panic. They were careful people. If something had slowed them down, they'd explain later. Still, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling pressing in on her chest. That night, Anna barely slept. Every sound of her phone made her heart jump, but no message arrived. At 2 a.m., she sat at the edge of her bed, scrolling through Emma's Instagram. She stared at the last picture, their smiles, the caption, "Wish us luck." It didn't look like the start of a nightmare. It looked like happiness. And yet, by now, she knew something was wrong. The next morning, worry turned into action. Anna called the lodge where Emma and Daniel were supposed to return. The manager confirmed they hadn't checked in. Panic spread quickly. Calls were made to local authorities. Within hours, rangers were informed. The official search had begun. For Anna, those first hours were the hardest. She kept trying to call, her hands shaking each time she pressed redial. She left messages, pleading, hopeful, then desperate. "Please call me back. We're worried. Just let us know you're okay." But the silence never broke. Her parents joined her at the house later that day. Together, they sat in the living room, waiting for updates from the search team. Each phone ring sent a wave of hope through the room, followed by disappointment when it wasn't news about Emma and Daniel. It was the kind of fear that grows slowly, then suddenly becomes overwhelming. The kind that eats away at rational explanations until only dread is left. They knew Emma and Daniel. They knew how prepared they always were. If they weren't answering, it wasn't because they had forgotten. It was because they couldn't. And that realization changed everything. The search for Emma and Daniel began quickly. Within hours of Anna's call, rangers were at the trailhead where the couple had last been seen. Their names were written neatly in the logbook, their permit recorded with precision. It was the kind of detail that showed just how careful they had been. But from that point on, the trail went cold. Helicopters were dispatched first. They swept across the canopy, circling for hours, their blades chopping through the humid air. From above, the rainforest looked endless. a sea of green stretching in every direction, broken only by winding rivers and scattered clearings. Spotters leaned out, scanning for movement, for any sign of a tent, a backpack, or two figures waving desperately from below. Nothing. On the ground, teams of rangers and volunteers pushed into the jungle. They moved slowly, cutting through vines and wading across muddy streams. Search dogs sniffed the earth, pulling their handlers deeper into the undergrowth. For the first 2 miles, the trail was easy to follow. Boot prints, carefully placed, suggested Emma and Daniel had walked steadily, just as expected. But then the ground grew messy. Heavy rain had washed away details. The further the teams went, the more the jungle erased their path. Local villagers joined the search, bringing knowledge of hidden trails and river crossings. Some guided rescuers to places outsiders rarely traveled. Others shared warnings about dangerous areas, unstable cliffs, fast-moving streams, dense swamps where a person could disappear in seconds. Still, no clear sign appeared. For days, the operation grew larger. At its peak, more than 50 people were involved. Radios crackled with updates. Search grids were drawn and redrawn. Every hour, new strategies were discussed. They searched by air. They searched by water, using boats to travel along the riverbanks. They searched on foot, combing the jungle in lines, hoping to catch the smallest clue. And yet, there was nothing. No discarded water bottle. No piece of clothing. No broken equipment. Nothing that could explain where Emma and Daniel had gone. The lack of evidence baffled the rescuers. Usually, in cases like this, even the most prepared hikers left behind something, a clue, however small, to show where they had been. But Emma and Daniel seemed to have vanished completely. After the first week, exhaustion began to set in. Storms rolled through the region, pounding the ground with rain, erasing whatever traces might have been left. Helicopters were grounded by lightning. Dogs struggled against the overwhelming sense of wildlife and wet earth. Searches came back each night drenched, scratched, and empty-handed. Still, Anna refused to lose hope. She traveled to the site, met with the teams, and begged them to keep going. She handed out recent photos of Emma and Daniel, telling anyone who would listen about their habits, their careful ways, their promise to return. They wouldn't do something reckless, she said again and again. The rescuers agreed. They had seen careless tourists get lost before. But Emma and Daniel didn't fit that pattern. That was what made the case so confusing. By the end of the second week, the search had covered miles of jungle. Rangers had mapped every route they could. Drones were used in places too dangerous for people. Even divers searched parts of the rivers, just in case. The effort was intense, relentless. But the rainforest gave nothing back. The mystery only deepened. How could two people so careful, so experienced, vanish without a trace? When the search teams came back empty-handed, theories began to spread. Everyone had an idea of what might have happened, but none of them could be proven. The first and most obvious theory was nature itself. The Amazon was full of dangers. Some said Emma and Daniel may have been attacked by a jaguar. These big cats were known to stalk quietly, striking without warning. If that had happened, there might not have been much left behind. But searches never found blood, torn clothing, or any signs of a struggle. It was possible, but the lack of evidence made it unlikely. Another theory was drowning. The rainforest was cut by rivers and streams, many of them unpredictable. Heavy rains could turn a shallow crossing into a raging torrent in minutes. Locals explained how even experienced travelers had been swept away before. Emma and Daniel may have tried to cross water that became too strong. Their bodies could have been carried downstream, hidden in the tangled roots along the river's edge. But despite divers searching, nothing was ever recovered. Some believed they had simply gotten lost. The Amazon was dense, paths splitting and fading until even a skilled navigator could be thrown off course. If their GPS failed and the maps got wet, they might have wandered in circles, deeper into the forest. Lost travelers often panicked, making mistakes that turned bad situations worse. Yet Emma and Daniel weren't the type to panic. Their careful nature made this explanation harder to accept. Then came the darker ideas. A few locals suggested that bandits or cartel members could have crossed their path. Remote areas of the Amazon weren't always safe. Illegal activity, from logging to smuggling, was known to happen in hidden corners. If Emma and Daniel stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see, someone might have silenced them. But again, no proof. No footprints, no items stolen, no sign of human confrontation. Just silence. And as the mystery grew, so did the wilder theories. Online forums lit up with speculation. Some users argued they were kidnapped and taken far away, maybe across borders, their story erased. Others whispered about supernatural explanations, that the rainforest itself had claimed them, the way it had claimed so many others before. On social media, people shared ghost stories, tales of cursed trails, even rumors of disappearances linked to UFO sightings in remote areas. For Emma's family, these theories were painful. Anna especially hated the more bizarre ideas. To her, Emma and Daniel weren't characters in a supernatural mystery. They were real people, her sister, her brother-in-law, who had gone missing. But no matter how many times she pushed for facts, the speculation kept growing. The contrast was sharp. On one side, logical explanations, animals, rivers, getting lost. On the other, shadows of human danger, or something stranger still. None of them brought answers. None of them brought Emma and Daniel back. And the longer the silence lasted, the more people began to wonder. Maybe the truth was something no one had yet imagined. For Emma's sister, Anna, the days after the disappearance felt endless. At first, she clung to hope. She told herself Emma and Daniel were just delayed. Maybe their phone had died. Maybe bad weather had slowed them down. She repeated those explanations like a prayer, trying to calm the storm inside her. But as days turned into weeks, the hope grew thinner, replaced by an ache that never left. Anna spent her nights staring at her phone, waiting for a call that never came. Every time it buzzed, her heart raced. Every time it wasn't news about Emma, the weight inside her grew heavier. Sleep became impossible. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, pacing the hallway, checking the window, listening for something, anything, that might break the silence. Soon, her home was filled with reminders of the search. Flyers with Emma and Daniel's faces sat stacked on the table. Maps of the Amazon, marked with circles and notes, covered the walls. Family and friends gathered often, lighting candles, holding vigils, praying for safe return. Neighbors brought food, but Anna rarely ate. She was running on worry and exhaustion. The lack of answers was torture. If they had been found, alive or not, at least there would have been some closure. But the nothingness, the complete disappearance, was worse. It left endless room for imagination, for dark scenarios that haunted her every thought. Refusing to sit back, Anna took matters further. She used her savings to hire a private investigator, Marcus Reed, a retired FBI agent who specialized in missing person cases. Marcus flew to Brazil, gathered files, and spoke with locals who had been part of the original search. He retraced the couple's last known steps, combing through reports, weather records, and even rumors. His findings were methodical but frustrating. He confirmed what they already knew. Emma and Daniel had entered the rainforest prepared, equipped, and cautious. They weren't reckless. He also confirmed what the searches had admitted quietly. The disappearance didn't make sense. Usually, there was something to go on. A dropped item, a piece of clothing, a sign of distress. With Emma and Daniel, there was nothing. Anna clung to Marcus's updates, but they rarely brought comfort. Each call ended with the same conclusion: we don't know yet. Still, she couldn't let go. For her, giving up meant abandoning Emma, and that was something she would never do. Her life became a balance between hope and despair. One moment she imagined Emma walking back through the door, tired but alive. The next, she feared the worst. Every year, she organized small memorials, standing with candles and posters, refusing to let her sister's memory fade. To the world, Emma and Daniel were another unsolved mystery. But to Anna, they were family, her family, and she wasn't going to stop fighting for them. In the months after Emma and Daniel disappeared, the search effort slowly began to shrink. At first, there had been helicopters, ground teams, dogs, and boats covering miles of jungle every day. But as weeks passed without progress, resources were pulled away. Other emergencies demanded attention. Officials couldn't justify keeping such a large team in the forest forever. By the end of the summer, Only a handful of rangers still checked the trails where the couple had last been seen. The large maps, once filled with grids and search patterns, were rolled up and stored away. Equipment was packed. Volunteers went home. For Anna and her family, the silence after the search ended felt almost as painful as the disappearance itself. It was as if the world was ready to move on, except them. The case was officially labeled a cold case. That didn't mean it was forgotten, but it did mean no one was actively looking anymore. Instead, it joined a long list of unsolved disappearances in remote places, filed away in dusty folders and digital archives. Investigators said they would reopen it if new evidence appeared, but without leads, the file sat untouched. At first, media attention had been strong. Local newspapers ran features about the search. National outlets covered the story of the prepared couple who vanished without a trace. Talk shows invited experts to speculate about what might have happened in the Amazon. Online forums buzzed with theories, some reasonable, others wild. But media attention is fleeting. By the one-year mark, most reporters had moved on to fresher stories. The articles slowed. The headlines faded. Social media threads grew quiet. Emma and Daniel's faces disappeared from the news cycle, replaced by new names, new tragedies. For Anna, that fading spotlight was devastating. She feared that once the world stopped talking, the case would be forgotten entirely. She worked hard to keep their story alive. Every anniversary, she held a vigil. She shared Emma's photo online, reminding people of the sister she loved and the brother-in-law she trusted. She spoke to journalists whenever they would listen, even if the interviews brought more pain than comfort. Her efforts kept the case from disappearing completely. True crime bloggers picked it up. Mystery forums debated it late into the night. Podcasts used it as an example of one of the strangest vanishings in modern times. But none of the attention brought answers. It only added to the noise of speculation. As the years stretched on, Anna's life changed in ways she never expected. She raised her children, went to work, and tried to live some version of a normal life. But Emma's absence was always there, a shadow that never left. Every birthday, every holiday, every quiet evening, there was a space where Emma should have been. People sometimes asked her why she kept holding on, why she refused to let go when so many years had passed. Her answer never changed. Because I know my sister, I know Daniel, and I know they wouldn't just disappear. For Anna, the lack of evidence was proof in itself. Something had happened, something hidden, something waiting to be discovered. And until the truth came out, she wasn't going to stop believing. It was the summer of 2022 when the silence finally broke. 12 years had passed since Emma and Daniel Parker had vanished, their case filed away as another unsolved mystery of the Amazon. By then, most people had stopped talking about it. But the forest hadn't finished telling its story. A team of geologists from a Brazilian university was studying the region after years of heavy rains and floods had reshaped parts of the terrain. Their work was routine, measuring soil, documenting erosion, recording changes in the landscape. On one humid morning, as they hiked deep into an area few travelers ever reach, they noticed something unusual. The side of a rocky slope looked disturbed. The soil around it was different, looser, as if it had once shifted violently. Vines and moss covered the surface, but beneath them was a shadow, a dark crack that didn't belong. Curious, the team cleared away branches and roots. What had looked like solid rock revealed an opening just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. At first glance, it seemed like a simple cavity formed by erosion. But the geologists knew better. The collapse of earth and stone had sealed whatever lay inside for years. Flashlights in hand, they crouched low and stepped into the darkness. The air was still, damp, and heavy. Each sound, boots scraping against stone, water dripping from the ceiling, echoed too loudly in the silence. As they moved deeper, the beam of light fell across shapes on the ground. At first, it looked like debris. Torn fabric. A collapsed frame of what might have been a tent. Then came the realization. These were not random objects. They were human belongings. A backpack, a water bottle, hiking boots, worn but intact. And then, in the far corner of the cave, the beams of light froze. Two skeletons lay side by side. The geologists stopped in their tracks. No one spoke. The sight was unmistakable. The remains were positioned as though the two people had died together, one arm angled as if it had once reached toward the other. Time and nature had reduced them to bone, but their presence carried a weight that words couldn't describe. Around them were the fragments of a life cut short, a tattered journal, its waterproof cover dirt-stained but intact, a flashlight, long dead, pieces of clothing, faded but recognizable. All of it told a story of people who had tried to survive but hadn't made it out. The team quickly backed out of the cave. They marked the location and contacted authorities. Within hours, the site was sealed off. Rangers, forensic experts, and law enforcement officials arrived, treating it as both a recovery scene and a potential crime scene. News spread fast. Locals whispered, remembering the foreign couple who had vanished 12 years earlier. Officials kept details quiet until the evidence could be confirmed, but those who had followed the case knew in their hearts what this meant. When investigators carefully re-entered the cave, they documented every inch. Photos were taken, bones were measured and tagged. The items scattered around the site were collected, but it wasn't just the physical evidence that mattered. It was the undeniable fact that after 12 years of silence, Emma and Daniel had finally been found. For Anna, the call came late at night. The words were both devastating and relieving. Her sister had been discovered. The mystery wasn't over yet, but the weight, the endless uncertainty, was broken. What exactly had happened inside that cave remained unknown. But for the first time in over a decade, the jungle had given something back. Among the belongings scattered across the cave floor, one item stood out. A waterproof notebook, dirt-stained but still intact. Its cover was scratched, but the pages inside had survived. Investigators opened it carefully, unsure what they would find. Inside, written in Daniel's steady handwriting, was a record of their final days. The first entries were practical. June 14th. Heavy rain. Trail washed out. Found shelter in cave. Supplies holding. Spirits okay. Emma and Daniel had reached the cave during a storm and decided to wait it out. Daniel's words were calm, logical, the way he had always been. He noted their location, described the conditions, and reassured that they had enough food for several days. The next entry shifted slightly. June 15th. Streams rising. Rockfall last night blocked main exit. Tried alternate route, too unstable. Returned to cave. Emma twisted ankle, keeping weight off it. She's strong, but in pain. The words revealed the first sign of struggle. Emma had been injured. Daniel's tone remained steady, but the concern between the lines was clear. He wrote about rationing supplies, calculating how long their food and water might last if they were careful. As the days went on, the entries grew more personal. June 16th. Water low. We share carefully. Emma keeps smiling, but I see the fear in her eyes. She asks if search teams are near. I tell her yes, even though we've heard nothing. June 17th. Supplies almost gone. Emma's ankle worse. Infection possible. I try to keep her spirits up, but mine are fading. Still, I can't let her see me lose hope. There were notes of love woven into the journal. Daniel wrote about Emma's bravery, about how she laughed at his bad jokes even while in pain. He described the way she insisted on sharing food evenly, even when she was the one who needed it more. His words painted a picture of a couple holding onto each other in the darkest moment of their lives. Then the entries turned heavier. June 18th. We are weak. No helicopters. No voices. Emma sleeps more, eats less. I worry she is giving up. I can't let her. I remind her of home, of family, of summer mornings we still need to see. She squeezes my hand but says nothing. June 19th. Today she asked if we'd ever leave this cave. I told her yes. I didn't believe it, but I had to say it. Her ankle is swollen. Fever. I can't stop it. No medicine left that can help. The final pages were almost unbearable to read. June 20th. Emma weaker. She told me she loved me. Asked me to tell Anna she loves her too. She smiled, even through the pain. I held her until she slept. I don't know if she'll wake again. The handwriting grew shaky. The lines broke with uneven spacing. June 21st. Emma is gone. She passed quietly this morning. She said the sunrise looked beautiful. I stayed beside her. I don't want to leave her. I don't want to go on alone. The words ended there, almost as if Daniel had no strength left to continue. Investigators sat in silence after reading the notebook. The entries told a heartbreaking story of survival, love, and loss. A couple who had prepared for everything, yet found themselves trapped by nature itself. But there was something more. On the final pages, beneath Daniel's shaky writing, faint indentations were discovered, marks left by a pen pressing harder into the page. Forensic experts later revealed that these indentations formed words Daniel had never written clearly, as if he had tried to leave a hidden message. The journal wasn't just a record of survival. It held a secret, and that secret would change everything investigators thought they knew about Emma and Daniel's final days. The journal painted a story of survival, but when investigators studied the cave more closely, the evidence began to tell a different tale. At first, it looked straightforward. Two hikers trapped by a storm, rationing supplies until exhaustion claimed them. But forensics has a way of peeling back layers. And the deeper they looked, the stranger things became. The first clue was the skeletons themselves. Emma's bones showed signs of injury consistent with Daniel's writing. Her ankle had indeed been fractured, her body weakened by infection. But her skull revealed something Daniel never mentioned. A small, round hole, neat and unmistakable. Under magnification, there was no doubt. It was a bullet wound. Investigators froze at the discovery. If Emma had been shot, then Daniel's careful notes about her fading away from infection weren't the whole truth. Either he had left something out, or someone else had been there. The second clue lay in the cave wall. Behind where the remains had rested, forensic teams noticed a shallow impact mark. Traces of lead were found embedded in the stone. Ballistic testing confirmed it. This was where a bullet had struck. And then came the third discovery, a handgun, half buried under fallen rocks, corroded by years of damp air. It didn't belong to Emma and Daniel. Their gear lists had been meticulous. They carried survival tools, but not firearms. The weapon had no place in their inventory. It was tested, and though degraded, the results were conclusive. The caliber matched the fragments in the cave wall and Emma's skull. Now the journal began to look suspicious. Had Daniel lied in his final entries? Had he tried to protect someone's reputation or soften the truth for Emma's sister? Or had he been forced to write under watch? The notebook itself offered more. Forensic specialists used light and scanning tools to examine the indentations beneath Daniel's final shaky handwriting. Slowly, a hidden message appeared, written faintly, as though Daniel had pressed down hard with the pen, but not dared to make it clear. The words were chilling, not accident. Someone here, being watched. That single note changed the entire direction of the investigation. This was no longer a tragedy of survival. It was something darker. Experts re-examined everything with fresh eyes. The sealed cave that looked like an accident of rockfall now seemed suspicious. Could it have been tampered with to trap them inside? The missing activation of their emergency beacon, a device designed to work even in dense forests, suddenly felt less like bad luck and more like sabotage. The evidence no longer told a story of nature's cruelty. It told a story of intrusion, of foul play, of murder. For Emma's family, the revelation was crushing. For 12 years, they had imagined Emma fading quietly in Daniel's arms, victims of bad weather and bad luck. Now they faced a far more horrifying truth. Someone had been with them in those final days. Someone had fired the gun that ended Emma's life. Investigators gathered the pieces, the bullet, the gun, the journal's hidden message. Together, they pointed to one chilling conclusion. Emma and Daniel hadn't just been lost in the rainforest. They had been hunted. The cave had revealed more than bones. It had exposed a crime, but the biggest shock was still to come. As investigators traced the origin of the gun, the pieces began to fall into place. Serial numbers were partly corroded, but enough remained for analysts to dig into records. The weapon was traced back, not to a stranger, not to some unknown bandit, but to someone who knew Emma and Daniel personally. It belonged to Mark Hayes, Emma's older cousin. The revelation stunned investigators. Mark had been with the family during the early days of the disappearance. He had comforted Anna, stood by her at vigils, even joined public appeals for help. To the outside world, he was another grieving relative desperate for answers. But behind that facade, something darker was waiting to be uncovered. Digging deeper, Detectives found financial records that painted a troubling picture. Mark had been drowning in debt in 2010. Credit cards maxed out, loans overdue, and Daniel, the careful, precise engineer, had been the one managing some of the family's shared investments. Emails recovered from old accounts showed that Daniel had recently confronted Mark about money that had gone missing. Daniel had given him an ultimatum: pay it back, or he would tell the rest of the family. The timing was striking. Weeks later, Emma and Daniel left for the Amazon. Weeks later, they vanished. Investigators began piecing together a possible motive. Mark had both the opportunity and the reason. By silencing Daniel, he could delay exposure. By silencing Emma, he could eliminate the only other witness. At first, it was hard for Anna to believe. She had leaned on Mark for years. He had been there for every memorial, every late-night call, every tearful anniversary. He had been her ally in grief. To imagine him as the one behind it, it felt impossible, but the evidence mounted. Cell phone records from 2010 showed Mark's number pinging in Brazil during the very week Emma and Daniel disappeared. He had never told anyone he had traveled there. He had claimed he was back home the whole time. Then came the final confirmation. Fingerprint fragments lifted from the corroded handgun matched Mark's old records from a concealed carry permit. The gun wasn't just his on paper, it had been in his hands. For investigators, the picture was clear. Mark had followed Emma and Daniel into the forest. Maybe he planned only to scare Daniel into silence. Maybe he hadn't expected the storm to trap them all. But at some point, a shot was fired, and Emma died. The betrayal was almost too much to process. To the family, it felt like losing Emma and Daniel all over again, only this time, with the added weight of knowing it wasn't just the rainforest that took them. It was someone they trusted. For Anna, the shock was indescribable. She had shared her grief with Mark, leaned on him for strength. Now she realized every hug, every comforting word, had come from the very person who carried the truth of what happened all along. Emma and Daniel had been prepared for the dangers of the Amazon. What they couldn't have prepared for was betrayal from within their own family. It took 12 years, but in late 2022, the knock finally came. Detectives arrived at Mark Hayes' suburban home with an arrest warrant in hand. Neighbors watched as he was led away in handcuffs, expression blank, refusing to answer questions shouted by reporters. To the outside world, he was the grieving cousin. To investigators, he was now a suspect charged with the murders of Emma and Daniel Parker. The trial that followed gripped headlines across the U.S. and beyond. After years of silence, the case had returned with shocking force. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse each day, true crime followers eager for a glimpse of the man accused of betraying his own family. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The courtroom wasn't just a place of law. It felt like a stage where 12 years of grief would finally be confronted. The prosecution began with the journal. A state investigator read Daniel's entries aloud, his steady handwriting projected on screens for the jury. The words were heartbreaking: rationing food, caring for Emma, watching her weaken. Then came the hidden indentation message revealed under forensic light: not accident, someone here, being watched. The room fell silent. Even jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Next came the forensics. Experts testified about the bullet hole in Emma's skull, the lead fragments in the cave wall, and the handgun found buried in debris. The weapon was linked directly to Mark. Partial fingerprints matched his records. Ownership records traced it back to him. And most damning of all, his phone had pinged in Brazil during the very week Emma and Daniel vanished. The prosecution painted a clear story. Mark had followed the couple into the forest, desperate to keep Daniel from exposing his financial theft. What began as intimidation turned into murder. And then, for 12 long years, he hid behind grief, pretending to mourn the very people he had taken. The defense tried to push back. They argued that the gun could have been stolen, that the fingerprints were partial and unreliable, that the phone ping was a coincidence. They suggested Daniel himself might have fired the gun in a desperate act, and the hidden message was misinterpreted. But the jury wasn't convinced. Too many pieces lined up. Too many lies had already been uncovered. The most powerful testimony came from Anna. She spoke through tears about her sister, about the years of silence, about how Mark had stood beside her at vigils while knowing the truth. Her words broke the courtroom's composure. Even seasoned lawyers lowered their eyes. When closing arguments ended, the jury needed less than a day. They returned with their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of obstruction of justice. Mark Hayes showed little emotion as the verdict was read, but Anna wept openly. For her, the moment was a storm of feelings: relief that the truth was finally exposed, rage at the betrayal, grief that nothing could bring Emma and Daniel back. The judge's words were final. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The cruelty here was not only in the act, the judge said, but in the deception that followed. For 12 years, you watched this family suffer, all while knowing the truth. Justice had finally come, but it was justice delayed. The trial answered the question of who, but it didn't erase the pain of why. When the gavel struck and the sentence was read, the courtroom fell quiet. After 12 long years, the Parker family finally had answers. Emma and Daniel's story had shifted from silence and speculation to truth. Painful, devastating truth, but truth nonetheless. For Anna, it was a strange kind of relief. She had spent more than a decade living between hope and despair. Nights spent staring at her phone. Anniversaries marked by vigils instead of celebrations. Questions that ate away at her until sleep became impossible. Now, at least, those questions had answers. Emma hadn't simply disappeared into the rainforest. She hadn't been careless or unlucky. She had been betrayed. That betrayal was the hardest part to carry. For years, Anna had leaned on Mark. She had cried in his arms, trusted his words, believed his grief was real. To learn he had been the one responsible, it was almost unbearable. I lost my sister in 2010, she said quietly after the trial. In 2022, I lost my cousin too. And yet, even in the heartbreak, there was a kind of closure. Emma and Daniel were no longer missing. They had been found. Their story, though tragic, was no longer buried in shadows. The cave had given up its secret, and justice had finally spoken. The family held a final memorial in Oregon. Friends and relatives gathered in a small park, surrounded by trees that whispered in the wind. Photos of Emma and Daniel were displayed, smiling, alive, filled with the spirit of adventure that had defined them. Candles flickered as the sun set. People shared stories of hikes, laughter, and quiet moments that revealed who they really were. For Anna, it was a moment to remember not just how they died, but how they lived. Emma's kindness, her steady hand as a nurse. Daniel's quiet determination, his ability to solve problems no matter how difficult. Together, they had built a life filled with love and adventure. And even in their final days, trapped in that cave, their bond had been unbreakable. The journal had proven that. Between the calculations and survival notes, Daniel had written words of love about Emma's courage, about the way she smiled through pain, about how he couldn't imagine life without her. His final entries showed not just despair, but devotion. He had faced death holding on to the memory of the woman he loved. In the end, their story was more than just a mystery solved. It was a reminder. The Amazon was dangerous, yes, but the greatest danger they faced didn't come from jaguars, rivers, or storms. It came from someone they trusted. Betrayal had walked into the jungle with them, and it had cost them everything. The case left a mark far beyond the Parker family. For investigators, it was proof that no disappearance should be dismissed as just nature. For friends and strangers alike, it was a lesson about how little we sometimes know the people closest to us. And for Anna, it was both an ending and a beginning, the end of her search and the beginning of learning how to live with the truth. At the cemetery where Emma and Daniel were laid to rest, their headstone carried a simple inscription: "Together in love, together in peace." Standing there, Anna whispered the words she had wanted to say for 12 years. "You're home now." Their story will never be forgotten. Not because of how they died, but because of the love they carried into the darkest hours. And as for the rest of us, stories like these remind us that the world is full of beauty and danger, light and darkness, trust and betrayal. Sometimes the jungle keeps its secrets. Sometimes it gives them back. Emma and Daniel Parker's secret stayed hidden for 12 years. But in the end, truth has a way of finding the light. If you followed their journey to the end, thank you for staying with this story. Stories like these show us not just the mysteries of the world, but the strength of love and the weight of betrayal. If you want to hear more true mysteries like this one, make sure to subscribe and join us for the next story.